So I think it's going to be really hard for me to stay like upbeat and positive during this one because these books are pretty heavy. Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex, and today we are doing more hard topic trauma books. This is part 2. I don't see this series ending like anytime soon. The list for this like genre, the like hard topic trauma books, is kind of long. Before we get into it, make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and all we do on this channel is talk about books. So if you like listening to people talk about books, here I am every week doing just that for you. Let's talk about what I consider hard topic or trauma. Anything that requires a trigger warning to me is considered hard topic or trauma. These ones, like the first book I'm going to talk to you about in particular, the trigger and trauma list is so long. It's a very heavy book. And then on the other end of it, one of the books I'm going to talk to you about today, I consider it very trigger light. Like, I had trouble finding other people that think that it's a trauma book, but I think it is. If you watched part 1, that post was a little more themed, and this one is not, because I had a really hard time trying to group together some of these trauma books. Like when I did part 1, those 3 books fit together so perfectly. It was so easy to put those 3 together. And then when I started looking at this list, I was like, I have no idea, because some of them share a lot of the same trauma, but then they have completely different genre settings, or it's like, well, do I count this, like, do I put these together because they're like including indigenous or BIPOC or POC characters, or do I put them together because of this? So I stopped trying. After a few minutes I was like, it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter if you like group them together or whatever. So I ended up splitting the list into 2 types of categories, like ones that focus on childhood trauma and ones that focus on trauma as an adult. Even though one of the books today kind of blurs that line, I'm gonna get into it. But yeah, I tried, and I think my brain is just not having it today, and I also think that it wasn't really that important to fit them nicely in a little box or whatever. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get into it. Okay, the first book I'm going to talk to you about today is 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. If you've been on my channel a minute, you've heard me talk about this book. This book wrecked me. It absolutely ripped my heart out of my chest. This is the saddest book I've probably read in a long time. I talked about this book on like my sob-worthy book list. It was done in like a wrap-up, I think, and it was also done in probably my Indigenous representation book post. I'll never stop talking about this book. I'll never stop thinking about this book. Michelle Good put an amazing book together, but it's heavy, and I feel like I was not prepared for how heavy this book ended up being. So, premise: 5 Indigenous teens. They're like between, but when we start following them, they're between the ages of like 17 and 20, I think. And as they're released from a residential school in Canada, and we follow all 5 of them as they're leaving the residential school and like calling back on their memories and how they're growing up as an adult. So I think the highlight of this book is to see how different people handle trauma long term, and also how traumatizing residential schools were to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous children. And we actually get to see 5 separate trauma responses to nearly identical trauma, because all 5 of them were in the same school at the same time together. It's a really interesting piece. It's really interesting, and it leads us all the way up to where we're starting to see legal pushback on residential schools from residential survivors. So it covers a large span of time, a lot of topics, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of pain, and the stories were just beautiful. Like, seeing the 5 different responses of many, 5 of many different responses, because we meet a lot of other Indigenous characters in the book that have gone through similar things too, but we're sticking to these 5 characters mostly. It was just so beautifully done. So beautifully done. I cried, like, but yes, very heavy book, very hard. Let me just go over the trigger warning, or the list for this book is long. So just, yeah. I'm going to be looking down at my list, okay, while I'm talking to you, because I can't memorize it. You know, whatever. So, drug abuse, child abuse, alcoholism, forced institutionalism, sexual content. I think the sexual content to me was a little light, but it's still there. And that is like consensual sexual content. Suicide ideation, self-harm, pedophilia, religious trauma, genocide, appropriation, child death, and PTSD. Heavy on the PTSD. That is the trigger list for this book. And I feel like you could probably add micro triggers in there everywhere. Say these are the big ones, and then pretty much anything that you could feel like would branch off of that is probably in this book too. There's a lot of trauma in this book. There's a lot of triggers in this book. Michelle Good did not spare any detail, so it's all very detailed in this book. So I would say if this is not something that you can handle based on these triggers, don't read this book until you're like completely ready. But this book was amazing, and I will never stop recommending it to people. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk to you about is Just Listen by Sarah Dessen. Okay, I feel like Sarah Dessen gets a lot of hate, and I don't understand it, like, at all. I grew up reading her books, and I remember being middle school, high school, reading her books, and finally feeling like represented, which is weird, you know, because I'm a white female, I'm cisgendered, heterosexual, you know, I'm very well represented everywhere. Emotionally represented, though. Her books made me feel emotionally represented. And I don't know why she gets the hate. She probably gets the hate because she's not extremely diverse with her characters. I will say that. She's not extremely diverse with the characters. But I felt emotionally represented by her when I was a kid. Like between the ages of 14 and 17. I'm really sure where all the hate's coming from, but I really liked her books. Also, I've read most of her stuff. So, premise of this book, we have a young teen girl, and she goes through something very traumatic one summer, and then when she goes back to school in the fall, her best friend has completely bailed on her, and she just feels completely alone. There's lots of gossip, lots of hate. You can imagine high school is kind of like not the place to be, and it's not the place to be when nobody likes you and you don't have any friends. Very difficult spot to be in. So she meets this boy, Owen, that's basically just the polar opposite of her, and he befriends her, and then we end up getting to watch her work through her trauma event and come out the other side stronger, better, etc. Is this my favorite Sarah Dessen book? No. Is this a good Sarah Dessen book? Yes. I think this touches on a lot of really great issues, including like bullying and like toxic friendships and things like that. It also touches on like the unlikely friends category that I really love. Sarah Dessen can kind of do subtleties really well, and I feel like there's quite a bit of subtleties in this book that to me just spoke volumes. And I feel like if you're in the category of like 14 to 17, I don't know, I didn't notice this when I was younger, but I notice it now, that they can like read into things a lot. I was like that when I was a kid, and I read somewhere that now it's like a trauma response or something, and I was like, well, okay, great, just more trauma. The dissection of sentences, of notes, of body language that teens can like pick up on, it's just done really well here, I think. Let's get into the trigger list. Bullying, depression, eating disorder, not our main character with the eating disorder, but it is a heavy theme in this book. Sexual assault. It was detailed. I had to look into this because I don't read. Okay, I read this book a long time ago, number one. Number two, I read so many hard topic books that sometimes it all blurs. I had to look really hard into this one to see if the sexual assault was detailed. This is what I came up with. Is detailed. Some people found it extremely triggering and some people did not. So, I would say it's 50-50 there. Last but not least, body shaming, which you can't have a healthy dose of high school without body shaming, now can you? I think this was done really well. A lot of people that have read it like more recently, her books are still like in libraries and things like that, and kids are still continuing to pick up these books because they do hit a lot of like hard and relatable topics. The biggest complaint was that this didn't have a trigger warning at the beginning. You have to realize, okay, talking to these younger generations now, you have to realize when these books were released, like when I was in middle school, high school, trigger warnings were not a thing. They were not printed in the fronts of books. We did not compile lists of trauma. We did not do that. Trigger warnings were not a thing. This probably really explains fairly well why my generation is the way that we are. It probably explains a lot. But yeah, I think that was the biggest complaint I saw, was people were upset that there was not any trigger warning at the beginning of the book. Trigger warnings did not exist back then. But I do think if they were to reprint this, or if this was like on digital download, that it would have a trigger warning at the beginning. But if you're reading one of the copies that was released, like, it would have been in the early 2000s. There will not be trigger warnings in any of those books, honestly. Unless they go to reprint, there won't be things like that. So yeah, we all went in blind, not knowing, and then reading. Yeah. Moving on. Okay, so this next one, this is the one I said that I had trouble finding trigger lists. Like, other people did not find this as triggering as I did. Not triggering to me personally, but I do think this is a hard topic book. So, that's my 2 cents on that. Let's get into it. The book is Gone, Gone, Gone by Hannah Moskowitz. I literally have to search so hard to find this book because I don't even know how I happened upon it. I can't remember when I read it exactly. I can't remember thinking what it was going to be about, like why I decided to read it. And yeah, centers around 2 young, I want to say like high school aged boys as they're dealing with the aftermath of 9/11. I feel like it's been like a year at this point. And they do, in this book, they do live close to where 9/11 happened. And so it really like affected them greatly going through that. So we're following these 2 boys as they're dealing with their trauma of overcoming that and just like trying to exist in high school. One identifies as gay. The other, I can't quite remember if he identifies as gay immediately or not. This is kind of like a little bit of a romance. It's very cute. But while we're navigating the halls of high school and dealing with the aftermath of 9/11, there's also a string of sniper shooting attacks happening in the city that they live in. At the time that I read this, I didn't realize that Moskowitz was drawing the parallel here to the Beltway sniper attacks. That's what this is. So, I don't understand why people are not considering this a trauma book. Like, I'm sorry, we're in the aftermath of 9/11. We're talking about 9/11 a lot in this book. We're talking about, like, you know, what people were doing, what were happening. We're talking about, like, people dying. And then on top of this, we have these sniper attacks happening in their neighborhood. They're constantly under lockdown. Like, I don't understand how people do not consider this a trauma book. Maybe because there's like a romance in there and it's like kind of cute and sweet and everything. But behind that, we have all this other stuff happening that's like, I'm sorry, slightly traumatizing, I think. So the trigger list for this for me is, terrorism, PTSD, and gun violence. I will definitely say I had trouble finding people that found this triggering or trauma-based book. So it could just be me. I could just be a soft, sensitive person. Whatever. I think it's considered a trauma book. But I also think that the story between these two characters was very touching, very well done, and I really liked it. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. Like I said, these did not go together. Like in part 1, they all kind of like fit into the same category. They went together in a nice little box with a bow. These did not do that. But I do feel like these centered around childhood trauma. It was either like the characters in the story itself was YA centered around childhood, or in the case of Five Little Indians, this was a case of a huge amount of childhood trauma that affected them throughout their entire life. Because if that had never happened to them, like, who knows how different their lives could have been. So make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week. And let me know if you guys want to see more trauma, hard topic books. Like I said, the list is really long. But I also said in part 1 that if people didn't really like this series, or like it wasn't going well, or I don't know, whatever, that I wouldn't continue it, that I would, look into other things to talk about. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!